Hey guys, how's it going? ItZMuRdA here with part one of what was originally going to just be one big video on how to not suck at CQC or SMG Infiltrator as inspired by Malorn. This is the loadout section, so I don't know if you're watching it secondary to the other part or if you're watching it first, but just so you know what's going on, this is going to be the loadout overview. It's just going to be literally me staring at a terminal in VR training and explaining all of the choices for my typical SMG infiltrator types of setups. I'll go over all three empires, all of the SMGs, all of the attachments for the SMGs, and the typical attachments that I would recommend, or why I might not use some attachments, or why I might use them situationally. I'll talk about sidearms, abilities and suit slots, grenades, utility items, stuff like that as well. So it really has everything that I think was worth mentioning with regard to loading out and setting up your SMG or close quarters infiltrator from the terminal itself. And then part two of this video is going to talk about gameplay commentary. You'll see complete gameplay footage the entire time. It's not going to be boring just staring at the same screen listening to me talk like this video might be. But I'm going to try to give some real examples of what I'm talking about that you can see on screen, and other times it's just going to be clips from my stream that make sense with what I'm talking about in general, and try to give you guys some tips, talk about the mechanics of the infill a little bit, and then go into detail on some things like movement, how to cloak, when to cloak, using line of sight and cover, knowing when and how to engage your enemies using your flanking techniques, escaping when you need to, opening and closing the fight as I call it, and how to do those things successfully, using your evasion techniques well, your aiming and your dancing, of course, your med kits, your sensor dart, and all the other tools available to you. Really, there'll be some assassination with the commissioner and the knife, some preferred routes that I might take at a tower that's being spawn camped and things like that. Really just talking about the quickness and the agility and the mobility that the infiltrator offers to really choose your fights, and how you can then use that to your advantage so that you can take out your targets reliably without dying so much. As I know you guys know and tend to complain about a bit, the Infil is, in fact, an inherently weak class when going head-to-head with any other class in the game, so you really got to use some of these other unorthodox approaches to your advantage to turn the tables in your favor, I guess. So hopefully the tips and the gameplay in part two of this will help you guys out in that regard, so be sure to check them out. You can click on the annotations or the links in the description below, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about some loadouts. I'm in VR training on a character, so it doesn't have all my loadouts and things like that, but this is my typical loadout for a character, and we'll work with this basically top down. The second generation SMG, so the Blitz GD10, which you see here for NC, or the Sirius SX12 for VS, or the PDW16 Hailstorm for TR, would be the ones that I recommend as kind of all around the best overall SMG for this type of build. Those are my favorite ones. That's not to say that the other ones don't work. Some people favor the first generation SMGs, but my take on those, that is the Cyclone and the Armistice and the Eridani, is that they tend to be better 1v1 weapons, but all too often, especially if you play this aggressively, you're not in 1v1 situations. When I use those, and I got them all to Araxium and things like that, I died so many times on a reload because of the small magazine size, and even though especially like the Cyclone has higher damage per shot, and the Armistice has 30 shots instead of 25 like the Cyclone and the Eridani, I still don't think that they're worth it to use over the 50 or 60 shot second gen SMGs. So that being said, they are arguable that they are better at 1v1, but beyond that, I think that these are going to be more practical for you to use. The NS7 PDW, the NS SMG that has been released more recently, is also a viable alternative, and it's something that I tend to use in an additional loadout if you can spare it. I would recommend buying a second gen first, but if you're looking to expand your horizons in the CQC Infil, I think the NS7 is a really good option for a mid-range weapon, a 15 to 65 meter weapon essentially. I think that these weapons are still going to be superior at very close quarters, and they're still going to be competitive at mid-range, but I think the NS7's damage drop-off and accuracy is really, really amazing, and you can even aim down the sight with the NS7 much better at a longer range and much more effectively than you can with a second gen. So that's something that I like to put in a separate loadout personally, but that's my take on the SMGs. As with any of them, this is my typical loadout. I go 1x scope, which you often never use. That's really just a preference. You hip fire them, especially the non-NS SMGs, like 99% of the time. So this is really your preference. I like the 1x to have it just in case I am taking a longer shot. The advanced laser sight, definitely the most important attachment and the thing that I would go for first. You get the regular laser sight, which gives you a 37.5% improvement in your cone of fire for your hip fire, and then the advanced laser sight upgrade, which moves that up to a 50% improvement. And then soft point ammo. This one's debated. It's kind of a small benefit for a small downside. I think that the benefit outweighs the downside personally, and I usually use it. But it's kind of one of those extra things that you can tack on in the future, especially if you're hurting for certs or anything like that. Now to explain just a little bit, because it's not very clear on the tooltips and things like that, soft point ammo has a very, very, very small range where it is effective. It basically will take a gun that, say, does max damage out to 10 meters and increase that to 15 meters. It may vary depending on the gun that you're talking about, but that's the gist of it, that for a little bit longer at close range you'll be doing the maximum damage per shot, and then beyond that range and within that range it does absolutely no benefit for you. As a downside, it makes your bullets travel slower. But it's only a 5% reduction in your bullet velocity, which is pretty negligible, honestly, especially at the ranges that you'll be using these. So that being said, I think that it's worth it to have that extra few meters of doing more damage when it actually will come in handy, and the bullet velocity reduction is almost negligible. That's not to say that bullet velocity is a bad stat, though. I think it's actually one of the most underrated stats, and I think that it's extremely viable to consider, which is the reason why I usually don't use a barrel attachment on my SMGs. Sometimes I will use a flash suppressor or a suppressor, but combined I probably use them 5% of the time and usually have nothing on here. The compensator is not worth it because it reduces your hip fire, which is what you want to be doing, so I would never really consider that. Personally, if you knew you were only going to ADS, like say with the NS7, you could potentially throw a compensator, an extended mag, something like that on it, but I really wouldn't typically get into that. There are better guns to do that with and better classes for that mid-range. Now anyway, back to the suppressors. The regular suppressor reduces the bullet velocity by 20% on an SMG, so you're talking, you know, the 5% of the soft point that wasn't that big of a deal, 4 times that much. It's really kind of a big deal and a big reason why I typically don't use them. I personally believe that most players in the game, as you'll find out and as you might know if you watch my stream and videos regularly, don't really use their audio and their map cues all that well, and I think that the suppressor just hurts you more than it actually helps you. Of course, in some situations where you're really behind enemy lines, you're the only friendly there, you're fighting intelligent opponents, what have you, it might be worth throwing it on, and I do have some loadouts with it on, but like I said, I very, very seldom use it. The flash suppressor is similar in that it has a downside in full auto accuracy, requiring you to burst a little bit more at extreme ranges. It's a very small downside, but it's also a very small benefit on SMIR and in daylight, on Indar and all of that. Almost nobody's going to spot you because you're muzzle flash, but when you're playing maybe on Hostin in the future or on Amrish or at nighttime, it might be worth throwing on. It's kind of just a situational thing, almost like what the night vision scope has become, where you want to weigh, you know, do I want the downside of it, which isn't really that big of a deal for something that may make me less likely to be spotted. Again, I usually don't use it in my default setup, but it is something that you might want to throw on at some point. Like I said, for the rail attachments, flashlight is the lulls. We don't want to use those. The laser sight is 99% of the time the way to go, the advanced laser sight that is. This is useless once you have the advanced one. And some offer a extended mag and some offer a forward grip. You can grab the extended mag on like the first gens or the NS SMG if you want, and if you thought that you would be ADSing the SMG more often. I do have a loadout with the NS7 that has the extended mag on it with the compensator. It's not really a loadout that I hip fire much at all, but honestly it's not really something I suggest. Forward grip you could go with, but I don't see it working, honestly. Like if you wanted to ADS the blitz, you would go with a forward grip, but you don't want to ADS the blitz. So typically you'd consider something like that. I'm probably giving even too much attention to these things as it is. And soft point ammo is the only ammo that is offered. You can't get HVA for SMG, so that's that. Sidearms, Commissioner is definitely my choice. That 450 damage, even without a headshot, makes for Commissioner plus knife follow-ups, which you'll see later in the video, extremely effective. It's also a really good sidearm for killing your opponent in one shot after you've injured them, but then have to reload, especially if you're using a lower capacity SMG. Underboss is really good too. A lot of people like it. Some people are starting to even use the Desperado some more, kind of as like a baby version of the repeater, which is also a popular alternative. That's kind of personal preference, but for this playstyle, I say Commissioner, and if not the Commissioner, I say Underboss. I think you need a heavy pistol to supplement it the best. This is always going to be your sensor dart for now. That might change in the future with the Infil update. This used to just be a no-brainer hunter cloak all day long, and now it's actually a much closer fight between the two. I talked about it a little bit in the GU14 patch note overview, and basically I think that they're both extremely close alternatives, and you want to use both at different times. I'm still largely doing some research and development of my own on the Nano Cloak, since it just came out yesterday. But the Hunter Cloak versus the Nano Cloak, basically the difference is you can remain cloaked for 8.5 seconds with the Nano Cloak, or 12 seconds with the Hunter Cloak. So you're looking at a difference of about 3.5 seconds of full cloak duration, favoring the Hunter Cloak. You can also have your shield recharge from fully depleted to full, and 11 seconds with the Nano Cloak, or 8 seconds with the Hunter Cloak. So again, you're looking at about 3 seconds difference in favor of the Hunter Cloak. The favor of the Nano Cloak is that you take 35% less damage from small arms. That's basically any gun in the game, things like that, not explosives and whatnot, while you're cloaked. So you can use that because infils often get spotted by just being in the crossfire when they're walking by, and they blink, and then they're very easy to see. Unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. So you can take some less damage and get to cover when you happen to be spotted and you didn't expect it. You can also use it intuitively when you're actually fighting somebody, and occasionally cloak when you have to reload or whatever, or even on an opener, and absorb some damage that you might not have been able to otherwise with the Hunter Cloak. So either work. Nano cloaking tends to be best when you don't actually need those extra 3.5 seconds of cloak time and recharge time. Tower battles, biolabs, things indoors, things where you're moving from cloak to uncloak, very often it'll probably do you better. And when you're, fighting people out in the fields, going from tree to tree and really relying on that cover to not be killed by tanks, you probably want to be running Hunter Cloak, but either can work, and that's going to depend on the situation. Nanoweave armor, I'm not even really going to discuss the others. There is reason to where you could potentially argue any of these others would be beneficial, except for maybe the extra grenades, I don't know, depending on the situation. But Nanoweave armor is so strong, the 250 health especially, it just gives the infiltrator even more benefit than the other classes, because infils have 900 total health, it's 500 health and 400 shields, compared to other classes that have 1,000 total health to start. So all classes gain 250 health from Nanoweave 5, but since infils start with lower total health, you're essentially getting a greater percentage benefit. I really think that it's worth having. It saves you from 1 to 2 bullets from everything in the game, and there's countless other times where you nick part of an explosion or something like that, and it leaves you at just a bar or 2 of health. And I really think it's the choice that will always have a chance of helping you out in every situation, whereas all the others are very situational. The grenades thing, decoys are really bad right now. They're getting fixed or buffed or whatever you want to call it in the Infil update. EMPs are okay. Some people use them. They're very teamwork, tactical, utility oriented. I pretty much roll with frags 90-95% of the time, just as a solo, lone wolf, small group, cert, kill farm oriented type of thing. They have the biggest chance, I think, of earning me additional kills, and I typically just go with the default frags for now. But like I said, that might change on the Infil update. Medkits are always going to beat resto kits unless you are lagging, or the server is lagging rather, and you have that problem where you hit your medkit and then a second later your health goes back to where it was before you hit your medkit. If you see that happening, you're going to want to favor resto kits instead. But honestly, you probably want to leave that fight and find a better fight, because that means that there's enough server delay that hit registration and other things and healing and cloaking are going to be off too. So you probably just want to relocate. But if you are fighting in that situation for whatever reason, then you would use resto kits. It's kind of stupid that the reason for using them is server lag, but it really is. Medkits just outperform in every fashion. They even cost the same amount of infantry resources to resupply. So I think the only difference is they're a little bit more expensive inserts, but you definitely want to go medkits. You want to get 4 when you can afford to, but you definitely want to get 1 or 2 early on as well. Anti-infantry mines, the bouncing betties, the proximity mines, the claymores, they are all good. They actually just got buffed recently, but I usually don't run them. The medkits, as you'll see and as you've seen, are just so essential to my survival, and the only time I'll pick up an AI mine is when I can weigh in their favor that I think I'm going to get more kills than what the medkit making me live longer would get me. Basically, you know, a extremely congested tower or spot near a spawn point or something like that where there's just a bunch of guys all huddled up, and I think I can drop 2 AI mines and get a bunch of kills, and then die pretty quickly and do it all over again, essentially. Oftentimes, a lot of the types of situations that I use C4 in as well for light assault and other classes. But typically medkits, really my favorite thing in the game, and I recommend using them, and using them well, and using them in combat and all of that. Lots of techniques that you'll see in the rest of this video, really. So I think that's pretty much it. There is no other melee choices at the moment, but we know that they are in the works, so that is pretty exciting, and we'll see what they have in store for us when that comes out. There's also going to be a stalker cloak that they're releasing where we don't know the details of it yet, but basically you sacrifice your primary weapon for some melee and some sidearm kills in order to have essentially a permanent cloak, or perhaps a harder to see cloak. We'll see the details on it. I don't think it's going to really suit this playstyle too well, but if you like the assassin thing, that might be for you. Personally, it needs to be really good for me to consider doing that and giving up my SMG. But that's pretty much the scoop on loadouts. That took a lot longer to talk about than I wanted to, especially since I covered it in the other videos. But just in case you were brand new to the Infil class, I wanted all the info to be here for you guys. So that is it on that. And then let's actually get into some other things in action and how some of these utility items and whatnot work out. So if you haven't yet, be sure to click the link on screen in the annotation or in the video description to go over to part 2 of this video and check out some of the gameplay mechanics and tips and things like that. And either way, I really appreciate you guys watching it, and thank you for all the support. And be sure to check out the stream at ItZMuRdA.com or twitch.tv/ItZMuRdA_TV. So I will see you guys in part 2. Enjoy.